Hello everybody, I am Cassidy, I'm the HippieCatholic. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe to be part of the conversation. So the interview you're about to watch and listen to was actually filmed about a year ago. I filmed it with my friend Zofia Maria, who is from Poland. A lot of things have happened since the filming of this video, so I felt like it was important to create an introduction. When we filmed this video, it was a few months after the protests in Poland, and the protests that I'm talking about took place in October of 2020. The protests were a reaction to a law that created a near abortion ban in Poland. The Polish government is very influenced by the Roman Catholic Church, and the Roman Catholic Church in Poland is very different than Roman Catholicism in other countries. You know, in some countries like Germany, the Roman Catholic Church is more progressive, but in Poland it is very, very traditionalist, very conservative. And this traditionalist form of Catholicism has a lot of control over Poland's government. As a Catholic, I respect what the Church teaches on the value of human life. However, I also recognize how complicated the issue of abortion is, and I think that it's an issue that requires delicacy. After all, abortion is a matter of life, autonomy, and what it even means to be alive. I also know that statistically, abortion bans do not stop abortion. They actually increase the amount of abortions that take place, and these bans can cause a lot of damage. Abortion bans can cause the opposite of what pro-life people want to see happen. For example, 30-year-old Isabella had been 22 weeks pregnant when she was taken to the hospital. The doctors did not perform an abortion despite her fetus lacking amniotic fluid. Medical staff told her that she could only be treated after the fetus died. Isabella died of septic shock on September 22nd, 2021. Activists say that Isabella is the first person to die because of the new law. Poland, for many in the United States, is an example of what can happen if extreme forms of religion intermix with politics. And this brings us to The Handmaid's Tale. The Handmaid's Tale is a dystopian novel adapted into a television show on Hulu. The story follows Offred, a woman living in a totalitarian theocratic state that was once the United States. All of the horrors that happened in the story have happened in real life, in different points in history. And that means they can happen again. I have also seen Polish TikTokers make content about growing up in religiously traumatic environments. And on the flip side, there has been radical traditionalist propaganda circulating on TikTok. This propaganda utilizes images of Christ, Our Lady, and other saints to assert the desire for political domination. And the premise of such propaganda should cause learned Catholics to raise a brow. Catholics believe that Christ is the logos of the universe. We believe that Christ is already the Lord of everything. Why would you need to conquer a land whose atoms already belong to the Lord that you say you fight for? If these people believe that this land must be won back for Christ, are they not denying the sovereignty of Christ? And Christ's already present absolute power? Just something to think about. Religious extremism creates us and them mentalities that allow for the dehumanization of people who hold different beliefs. The belief that your side is always good and that your opponent's is always bad is very dangerous. In the wise words of Jesuit priest Daniel Berrigan, it seems to me that those who step out of the quicksand of bad history by some heroic act of anti-gravity still believed murder is legitimate. They call the killing of the bad guys a revolution. They ignore the fact that this is the most profound and bloody stereotype in history. Everybody has always killed the bad guys. Nobody kills the good guys. The church is tainted with this as well. The church plays the same cards. It likes a taste of imperial power too. This is the most profound kind of betrayal I can think of. We must make the old stereotypes uncomfortable by asking distressing questions. The interview you're about to listen to explores the true history of Poland and Catholicism, from the beginning to current events. Sophia also shares her journey as a Catholic in Poland and her evolving relationship with the church and her activism within it. I invite you all to listen to this very wise young woman so that you can expand your perspectives on religion and politics in the global sense. I now ask you, is Poland like The Handmaid's Tale now? Without further ado, I present our interview. Hello everybody, I am Cassidy, I am the HippieCatholic. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe to be part of the conversation. In this video, I will be discussing what has been going on in Poland, because I know that there's been a lot of conversations about Poland in America, and especially in like American Catholic circles. I'm American, so there's only so much I can speak on Poland. So I brought in a special guest. Her name's Zofia Maria, and she is from Poland. She is a daughter of God and a loud, proud feminist and Catholic. Go follow her Instagram account. Like, it's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, just like look at these photographs, so gorgeous. So please follow her. She's amazing. So could you tell us a bit about yourself, Sophia?
Hello, everyone. I'm very glad to be here today with all of you. I'm Zofia. I'm from Poland, although I formally study in London, but due to this whole pandemic situation, I'm stuck at home. I'm a cradle Catholic. I study history also. I identify as a Catholic feminist. I've been interested on the topic for a few years now, despite the fact that it's so hard to get some information on Catholic feminism in Poland. I came here all to explain to all of you the situation that is currently going on now in my country since the end of the last year.
One of my very pro-life friends, who's also like very pro-woman, has said that the focus on pro-life activism in the U.S. should not be focused on overturning Roe v. Wade. And also, like, denying access to abortion doesn't prevent abortion. It doesn't stop abortion. It just pushes it back under the rug, and basically more women and fetuses will die. And if we're pro-life, we have to be thinking of all life, right? We have to be thinking of like the women and the fetuses as well. The reality is that like people seek abortions because they don't feel like that they have other options. Like nobody is skipping to an abortion clinic. Like nobody is like, it's a very, very serious decision that people make. And this was something that this pro-life friend of mine also said, is like, you cannot legislate morality. You need to transform the culture. And a big part of that is treating people with respect and love. We need to empower women. We just need to empower women, and women will take care of their children. I am really excited because Sophia actually made a presentation explaining the history of Poland and Catholicism. Just thank you so much for making this presentation for us. I'm so excited to see it.
I chose the things that I find the most important, and I also thought about debunking some popular myths about Poland and its Catholicism. So I decided to kind of squeeze both the history of Catholicism in Poland in order to give the audience and to you, Cassidy, some background of what is going on, and also share my story, because I think I'm not a classic type of a Polish Catholic, and in general I think I kind of stick out sometimes. So the beginnings of Poland are generally, I would say, they are kind of dark times, let's say. This map that I have here, this is actually a map which was also, I remember I had a very similar map in my school book with basically the red letters are the peoples that live here, the Slavic tribes. As you can see, Polanie is the peoples who kind of conquered the rest of it, the rest of the country. That's where the name Poland comes from. Polanie basically means people from the field, so which probably means that we came somewhere from the east, like from Ukraine or from Belarus, although it is not known. It is still a huge debate about that in historical backgrounds. I'm not an expert on that topic. I'm not a medievalist. I'm just, my specialization is legals. But I think it is good to kind of share it. The year 1966 is the first recorded, let's say, main event in Polish history. And that is when Duke Mieszko, although we don't even know whether this guy's name was Mieszko, because his name was first translated to German, from German to Latin, and his name in Latin is Misicus, and then back from Latin to Polish. So we don't even know what was the original name in let's say, Proto-Polish or Proto-Slavic. Mieszko accepted baptism from Duchy of Czechia. He made probably a political union with them. He married the daughter of the Czech Duke, and they wanted to attack this part, which is the Bielets, I think that's the name of those peoples in in English, and there were just some, let's say, Slavic peoples who lived in what is now Germany. We converted officially to Christianity. Many communist historians earlier used to believe that Mieszko did that in order not to be under the influence of the German emperor, but this is wrong. They did that just to have this union with Czechia, because Czechia was still under the influence of Germany. So from whoever you got the baptism, there was not much difference. You were still with the Union of Germany. Also, Mieszko had a title officially in the documents. He is called the great friend of the German Empire. So it seems like we had close ties to Germans in our beginnings. What is really important about that? Baptism of Poland technically means that Mieszko, his court, his advisors, his soldiers, they were the people who got baptized. The rest of the country still remained in its original Slavic religion. And the Christianization of Poland was a very long process. It's still, I think it's kind of fully was imposed on Polish peoples like a few centuries later in many villages, the old paganic, let's say, how do we say it in English? Not festivals, I mean, but traditions, let's say, they kind of managed to live for quite a long time. I think many of them died out during communism because they were treated as some kind of stupid beliefs and they were wiped out. And what I think also is quite important, in year 1038, so it is this third generation of the Piast dynasty which rules Poland, we have the so-called paganate reaction or uprising. It was also about politics because there was this another guy who served in the court who wanted to take power over the kingdom, but also this uprising had a religious background. Basically, people didn't want to be Christianized. So, they destroyed crosses, attacked churches, and destroyed them. So basically, we became a paganic country, let's say, although I don't like the word paganic, but let's stick to it for a lack of a better word. So we have to remember that all this situation with Christianization, de-Christianization, re-Christianization of Poland happened before the Eastern Schism. So this is the schism with the Byzantine Church that the Western Church had. And from now on, we can say that we have the Eastern Orthodox churches and the Roman Catholic Church or the Catholic Church. Later, we have another important role of the church in Polish history is with the feudal fragmentation. It was a normal, let's say, point in history of many countries when the king had many sons, the king or the duke had many sons, and broke the country into smaller pieces for his own sons, because there were too many children to give, and so on. In the year 1138, we have this one duke named Bolesław the Wrymouth, Krzywousty. He was called the Wrymouth because he probably had an accident as a child that when he was hunting with his father or with his company, and he fell off a horse, and the wild boar attacked him. And at least that is the legend, and cut his face in a very nasty way, and he looked very, let's say, scary or ugly for the rest of his life. And his succession testament, actually, there was no document like that, let's say. But historians invented kind of the idea of the testament to explain what was the idea, let's say, of Bolesław for the future of his land after his death, as he did have many, many sons. I think the map actually is quite from a later period, further into the fragmentation. But there is also kind of a theory that Bolesław did that because he wanted to avoid war that he had once with his elder brother, with his younger brother, that he killed eventually. So he wanted to avoid that. Anyway, as you can see, this is year 1320. This is the end officially the end of the division. But by that time, the lands that were unified by Władysław Łokietek it was really diminished. It was very, very small. Like it was only like a small, let's say, not a piece of pizza, but let's say from Kujawia, this region here, the kingdom of Władysław was much smaller than what was originally the Duchy of Poland when Bolesław III passed away. But what changed, especially during the rule of Casimir the Great, the son of Władysław, was the fact that we moved with our expansion not to the northern west, let's say, but we decided kind of to move to the east. And because Casimir had an uncle who was the Duke of the Duchy of Halic, which was a Ruthenian, one of the Ruthenian duchies. And George, his uncle, he didn't have no sons, so he was like, okay, you know, when I die, I'm giving my lands to you. And that's how it ended. What happened was the German colonization of the land. Many German peoples were brought by the dukes because they knew how to, they knew more modern, let's say, methods of cultivating land. So we also had, especially in the cities, which is important for later. Also in the north, we had the issue with the Teutonic Order, who were also ordered to come to fight, originally to fight with Prussians who were not the same as Prussians that we know later. The later Prussians are of German origin. At the time, Prussians are Baltic people from the eastern northern side of Poland, let's say. And the Catholic Church, in all of this mess, had some role in the unification because the church administration remained the same, just like before the feudal fragmentation. Let's say that the church officials also participated in the process of unification to some extent, which is, I think, a positive role of the church in general. This is my town, and the region to the west side of it, we couldn't retake it for a long time, but it still was like a part of the church administration, and the Polish rulers had like this argument, but yeah, but formally this is like a part, you know, of our church. Also, it belonged to us earlier. We need to take it back. They had this argument. We are making a huge jump, but that is the unions with Lithuania. Lithuania was a really big, let's say, a duchy, a grand duchy, which spread through the Eastern Europe in 14th century. Let's say that Lithuania was like from the Baltic Sea, from, let's say, from the very north, it almost like reached Estonia, I'm almost sure, to the very, very south to the Black Sea. But we had those unions with Lithuania. The first one, which was just not an official, let's say, union, it was like a union of a common ruler. It was in 1385 in Krevo, and it was about the marriage between our female king, Jadwiga. You may know her because she is also a saint. She was, her family name was originally d'Anjou, because the dynasty ruled Hungary, but the family was from France. And the next union which we had, which was almost 200 years later, and that was the Union of Lublin, which is still like in the center of Poland. The Union of Lublin is important from a religious point of view, because Sigismund II Augustus, who was already, he was like the last king of another dynasty, the Jagiellonian dynasty, he proclaimed his kingdom as religiously tolerant, which was very refreshing for his times. At times when we had the Reformation, we have religious wars, and so on. And Sigismund just appeared to his noblemen, and he was like, "You know what? I will not decide for you. You will make your own decisions, noblemen," because noblemen by that time had a very high status in the society. And he said, okay, I'm not going to impose it on you. I may remain a Catholic, me and my family, but you can be Protestant or maybe Orthodox, be whoever you are. And another important point in here is the Warsaw Confederation. And confederation, I know that this word has some really nasty background, I think, in the West. So to explain, confederation at the time, in our understanding, was like an organization of noblemen who agreed on let's say, a similar cause. And confederation was also the name of the document they often created, which stated, let's say, their postulates. And the Warsaw Confederation was technically a union between Protestant noblemen, that they will support each other in case of need. But also it was one of the very first documents in Europe regarding allowing religious freedom, which was, again, very refreshing for the time. Many intellectualists of the time were Protestant. One of the very first writers who wrote in Polish, and he tried to write Polish down because Polish at first was seen as the language of people, of peasants, of uneducated people. When you wanted to be educated, you needed to write in Latin or in German or in Italian. Mikołaj Rej was the very first man to write in Polish. He even had this saying, Poles are not geese, they have their own language. Not geese, sorry, I said it wrong. I decided to show the monument of the union between the king, because I prefer to call her the king, although the monument has Hedwiges Regina Polonie, Jagiella Magnus Dux Lithuaniae, which is wrong, because many people say that she was the queen, but when you look even at the Polish language, what królowa means only the queen consort. So only the wife of the king, who is the mother of the legitimate heir. But król means like an independent ruler regarding of gender. She needed to take the title of king instead of queen in order to. It's not like in England where Elizabeth established herself, for instance, as a queen. Going further, this is the very famous picture of the Union of Lublin by Jan Matejko. It is not a historical portrayal in the sense that some people I know in this picture, portrayed in this picture, were dead at the moment of Union of Lublin, but they symbolize that people of all faiths, let's say all parts of the country, participate in it. It is to some extent idealistic, but I think it is nice to show. And now we are going to the main topic that we're interested in, that is religion. Since we became a very religiously mixed country due to Reformation and due to the fact that we have these eastern territories attached to our country from what was originally the Kievan Rus. So the greens are the Orthodox Christians, the yellow color, mostly in stripes, are the Calvin Christians, the Calvin Protestants. The blues are Lutherans, and the purple are Catholics. And as you can see, there's also some smaller minorities like Jews, Armenians, Crimean Karaites. I don't know how to name those people in English. They're ethnically Turkic, and they kind of split from Judaism. I don't know, because this minority basically doesn't exist in the West, so it's very hard to explain their origin. Because the Muslims who had their communities in Vilnius, which is on this map, it's Vilno, the capital city of Lithuania. And also we had other Protestant groups apart from Calvinists and Lutherans, which were also like, let's say, Arians, but they were like this branch of Protestant Christianity that they did not believe in the Holy Trinity. That is why they were object of attacks both by Catholics and Protestants. But they were known to have the best schools. So when a nobleman wanted to have his son very well educated, he sent him to a school run by Arians. Yeah, this is how they were called, I think. A very beautiful, colorful picture, as you can see. I love this map. We also had also Greek Catholic Church, which was kind of like split from the Eastern Orthodox branch after some Orthodox bishops agreed to keep the union with the Pope. They are all Eastern Rite, let's say, and their calendar, icons, the form of performing sacraments. The main difference was just that they agreed to keep the union with Rome rather than with Moscow, for instance. So shortly after the Renaissance, what happened? When the Sigismund died, we didn't have the dynasty anymore. The kings were elected out of elects who came from various different countries. Some of them were members of other dynasties. We had one king who was from France, but he just went away after a year. He just left. The second king to really rule after Sigismund II was Stephen Bathory. He was also, I think, the very distant nephew of Elizabeth Bathory, you know, the woman who was accused of being a vampire. And the third king was Sigismund III Vasa. Vasas are from Sweden, but surprisingly, Sigismund is not Protestant. He is Catholic. His mother, Katarzyna, or let's say Catherine, more in English, she was a Jagiellonian princess and the sister of the last Jagiellonian king. And his father, Eric, he had this idea that he would literally make his son a perfect candidate to rule Poland. So he ordered Jesuits to teach his son from the very young years. And he literally made his son the most Catholic member of his family, like fanatic. During the period of elected kings, we have a small like Vasa dynasty period. And we can see during their rule that we had actually a growing influence of Catholicism again. The Jesuits were welcome to the country again. They had their education. The Greek Catholic Church was created most likely due to the influence of Piotr Skarga, who was the confessor of the king. So he had a huge influence on Sigismund, and they were like, okay, he kind of gave him the idea, most likely to make the Orthodox Church bow to the Pope. So that's basically how the Greek Catholic Church was formed. Or I know that they can be also found under the name of Ukrainian Catholic or Byzantine Catholic. When you just search for them, that's more or less the same group. Most of the wars that Commonwealth had was somehow with countries of different faith. So Sweden and Brandenburg were Protestant, the Grand Duchy of Moscow was Eastern Orthodox, and the Ottoman Empire was Muslim. And it was kind of like a shift, let's say, in our internal politics again. So we can see that this frequent conflicts with people of different cultures or different religions, as well as the increased support for Catholicism from the Vasa kings, had this kind of its role in the creation of this nationalism among nobility, which intertwined it with religion. Some noblemen, for instance, who had Protestant, let's say, fathers or grandfathers, converted back to Catholicism for patriotic reasons sometimes. So yeah, we can see that there is this comeback of Catholicism. Wars in the 17th century led to the weakening of what we call the Republic or the Commonwealth of Poland and Lithuania. In the 18th century, most of the reforms were ineffective and were often applied too late and not on enough mass scale as it was in Russia or on the Habsburg Empire or in Prussia. Long story short, the wars they just tired the country out. There was no organization, no idea for this country, and it ended up in partitions. The first one in 1772, second one one was in 1793, and in 1795 there was the end of all of it. And Catholic bishops have a very weird role in this whole situation, because many educated people in the 18th century were priests to some extent, which is unlikely, and it's like a phenomenon on the European scale, where most of, let's say, intellectualists were laymen. But in Poland, it was like a reverse. But it was most likely due to the financial reasons. Many men became priests because they knew that they would be provided with regular finances. But the bishops, let's say the hierarchy, they supported the partitions. They weren't against it. They're like, okay, fine, you're coming. You can see which part. Of course, the center with Warsaw changed during the Napoleonic Wars. But that's more or less how it was. The huge part of what was used to be Poland, the biggest part was in the Russian Empire. The smaller parts were in Prussia or later Germany. I remember even my geography teacher making a joke that you can actually see partitions even on how our train routes were constructed. You can see who made what in 19th century. So we have the most like trade routes in what used to be Prussia, but in the east we have like very little of that, like almost nothing, because the Russians didn't pay much attention to it. On 123 years, we were literally broken into those three parts. And during that time, the Catholic faith became, it's comparable to what happened in Ireland when the English ruled in Ireland. Catholic faith also became more significant to many people during the partitions due to the national cult of Our Lady of Częstochowa, due to many important events that kind of intertwined themselves with Catholic faith. And I think it's also allowed one another to distinguish each other in often very multicultural empires. Like in Russian Empire, there were just so many other nations, and the fact that you were a Catholic also kind of added something up to your identity. It differed you from Orthodox Russians, or mainly Orthodox Russians, from Lutheran Latvians and Estonians. It differed you from Muslim Turkic people, for instance. And the same was in Austria. And in Prussia, of course, the German minority was Lutheran, at least in Prussia, because we know that in southern Germany the situation was different, but we had more contact with Prussians. So yeah, of course, some people of different faiths still chose to define themselves as Poles, despite being of different faith. I know that some Lutherans still define themselves as Poles, and many Tatar Muslims still define themselves as Polish as well. Coming back to the church became interested in the potential existence of Polish statehood only when it became convenient to them, unfortunately. At least that is from the hierarchical side. Hierarchy became kind of interested in potential existence of Poland because it was more convenient, basically. Regarding some individual priests, I think it was different. I think it depended on the individual. But I know that one of the founding fathers of the Polish socialist movement was a Catholic priest, and he was very openly socialist. And I remember he even wrote this book on his philosophical thoughts, why he thinks that all the people need to be treated equally. You know, when I went to outside Poland, when I went to the United Kingdom, I was surprised that remembering World War I is a sad event in the United Kingdom. Of course it is, because for them it was a loss of their empire, but I wasn't used to seeing World War I this way. To me, it was a very happy moment because we were like, yay, we regained independence after 123 years. Like, wow, who does that? We are like the guys who do the impossible thing, of course, but this is the myth of our union after the partitions. So we had these two ideas of the future of Poland, let's say. One was Joseph Piłsudski, who later became the dictator, but at that point he's a better guy, let's say. He was a socialist, and he had this idea that Poland should be rather a federation of states rather than a monoethnic country. So it would be like there is Poland, which leads them all, and then there is Lithuania, Latvia, Belarus, Ukraine, perhaps Estonia too. So that was his idea. And there was the nationalist option formed by another gentleman who was quite important in the whole process, but he was nationalist and slightly anti-Semitic, Roman Dmowski. Later, just 8 years later, about 8 years later, we have the May coup in 1926, and Piłsudski basically became an informal dictator. He formally had no power, but in fact he was the one who pulled the strings. And after World War II, as it is quite visible, the Soviet Union were the guys who decided on how our country would look like. We kind of gained back, let's say, the lands that we lost in the Middle Ages. So this whole eastern part ended in the Soviet Union. What is important here is that after the war, Poland becomes mono-ethnic country. We were still a very multicultural and multi-religious country before the war. The Roman Catholics were only like 64.8% of the overall population. And Poles, generally people who declared themselves as Polish, were like 66, I think, percent. So only 2/3 of the society. The rest were Orthodox Christians, Greek Catholics, Jews there were about 3 million, the largest Jewish population in Europe. Protestants, religion was close to someone's ethnicity, but as we can see, there were still some people who declared themselves as Polish without being Catholic. And after the war, it was just like that all these minorities were left in the East, let's say, and Poland became predominantly Catholic. How to say it shortly, how to squeeze the years of communist rule between 1945 and 1989. It's hard to explain all of this in just one video, but recently there has been an investigation, or maybe not an investigation, let's say, but a group of ethnographists from Warsaw decided to kind of write down all the outlook of people on Catholicism during all those years, about this 40 years of communism. And what they found out was that, in 1950s, like only 50% of the society, so only like, we could say like about 10 million people declared themselves Catholics. But the popularity of Catholicism like grew again when people, like let's say the generation of my grandparents and my parents, thought that sticking with the church was a good option for combating communism, because it was just another strong option, let's say. Imagine that you go to school and all you hear is propaganda, and the church are the guys who give you an alternative view of things. It's surprising that many people just stick with the church because it was the strongest bastion of opposition at the time. And I don't blame him. I think the apogee of popularity of Catholicism was during when Karol Wojtyła was elected as Pope and he became Pope John Paul II. Was later there was just the 1980s was just the downfall of this of the communists. We had in 1980 there was the Solidarity was created. The church generally supported through those decades. It supported the opposition. Although not all the oppositionists were Catholic or were practicing Catholics, they just needed a strong ally in this fight. 1989, I think it marked the growth of importance of the church hierarchy, especially. And those last 30 years are really weird, I would say. In 1990, so just a year after the fall of communism, in Poland at least, because we know that Soviet communism fell in 1991. Religious education returned to schools, which is, how do I explain religious education for someone who is from a different country? Let's say that you go to a public school run by the state, and you have lessons with, usually, but not always, with a priest or with a nun, who gives you lessons about Catholic religion, how to be a good Catholic, but which is useless. Not all Poles are Catholics. Like usually, the lessons right now are pretty useless, to be honest. Most teachers on such lessons that give such lessons are not prepared to give them. They just impose their own private beliefs and mingle it with Catholicism. Of course, the views on abortion or contraceptives, generally on sexual life, thoughts of purity culture. Also, sometimes there is anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and of course, homophobia. Yeah, those lessons are a ride, let's say. But sometimes the teachers don't even have an idea how to run them, so it's like a loss of hours or two in the school curricula. And even when you look at the statistics, sometimes students have more lessons of religion, let's say, than of geography or physics, which are both very important subjects. So this is absurd. And many people just wanted to return back to the churches where it belonged. And I also agree with it, because I think it's wrong to impose in a formal school curriculum on other students my beliefs, and also to do it with a person who is completely unprepared to teach on the topic. And also 1991 is an important point, because this is the start of so-called Radio Maria or Radio Holy Mary. There is this redemptorist from Toruń, which is not so far from my town, a little bit to the south. How do I explain it? So, I'm sorry, but I'm becoming really angry when I speak about those people, because Radio Maria is the most cancerous Catholic media you can imagine. They officially will tell you that, but we just want to transmit prayer through the radio. Okay, it's fine that you transmit like rosary prayers or masses, but at the same time, this radio is very controversial because the guy who runs it, this Redemptorist Tadeusz Rydzyk, is known for having some really shady businesses. And the guy has lots of money. He's like a really, really rich. Another thing is that they spread a very oldish form of Catholicism. When you like listen to them, like for instance, they often have like in between those prayers, they have auditions regarding mostly political issues like contraceptives or life in marriage. And I remember there were a few very controversial auditions at this radio. For instance, there was a priest who literally told women that they should accept a husband that is abusive, for instance, because this is a gift from God to prove yourself that you are the perfect wife. Or who says that? This is promoting rape culture. This is promoting also, there was some purity culture thing there. I blame the guy. I blame this Redemptorist and his radio for destroying relationships in many families. Mostly elderly people listen to this radio and they get this propaganda, this propaganda gets their heads and they lose contact with reality. Like I know that some people who tell me about their grandparents or grandmother, or mostly grandmothers, who do not listen to any other media or do not read any other newspapers. They only listen to this radio, and it's like this radio is their only contact with the outside world. I know this is about promoting a political agenda wrapped in Catholicism. Yeah, in 1993 we had the Concordat, so this is international treaty between the Vatican and Poland. According to many people, it is unfair, but I kind of agree with it because it only gives all the stuff has to be done by the Polish government, but not by the Vatican. So it doesn't say that the Catholic bishops, for instance, cannot have some ties to the Polish politics, for instance. These exceptions regarding abortion are only when the fetus is seriously damaged, when the pregnancy is a result of a rape or of incest, also when mother's life is endangered, and that's all. But this system doesn't work because we have much more rape. And when you look at the statistics of how many abortions are performed due to rape circumstances, it is surprisingly low number. And it is because our even system of checking a woman after rape, it doesn't work. It's like double stigmatizing the woman after being raped, because women, of course, are being they can't even, after, imagine like a woman, for instance, technically, according to the Polish law, after rape, she shouldn't even clean herself. She shouldn't take off her clothes. Immediately, she should go to nearest hospital and ask to be inspected. And, every hospital has a special room for it. So when the doctor is leading you there, everyone around standing around there knows that you most likely have been raped, and you need to be checked by the doctor whether there is some genetic material, for instance, of your rapist left on your body. I mean, terrible. The system doesn't work, in my own opinion. I'm against it. Later, going back to year 2005, that's the point when our, let's say, important figure, John Paul II, dies. And exactly 10 years later, a conservative and autocratic party, Peace or Law and Justice, as that's the name in English, won the elections, both in the government and presidential elections. And the informal alliance between the church hierarchy and the ruling party begins, and it still affects us till today. In 2016, they made the first attempt to impose further restrictions on abortion, but at that time there was the large wave of so-called black protests, and they made a step backwards. In 2019, we also have to remember that in the meantime we have lots of pedophilia scandals regarding the church, and the way the church acted was just scandalous, I think. There was this film, I think that one of the apogeumes of these scandals was a documentary film by Sekielski brothers. You can find it on YouTube. It's called Tell No One, Tylko nie mów nikomu, on pedophilia. And it's covering by the Polish Catholic Church. No, not Polish Catholic Church, because Polish Catholic Church is a Polish Old Catholic predomination, sorry, by the Polish hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church. We also had a case of the Rainbow Madonna, which has been resolved recently. There was this Polish artist, Mrs. Elżbieta Podleśna, who, I don't know whether you have seen the Madonna of Częstochowa or Mary of Częstochowa with the rainbow aureola. This is her creation. Mrs. Podleśna has been by so many conservatives. She has been accused of so many things. She has been accused of destroying religious property. We also have this stupid thing in our law called, it's like, I think, hurting of someone's religious feelings. This is how it is called. And technically speaking, it just shows how our law is precise, and how the fact that it's imprecise can be used. Because of course everyone can agree that when a thing which is like belongs to some kind of religion and it's used in a cult in this religion is destroyed, this person should be punished. We are all right. We need to respect someone's belongings that also have some connections with religion. But the problem is that Catholics in Poland, many people, generally people, let's say, they don't have the, let's say, education regarding art. And the fact that the religious motives, also motives with Madonna, with Lady Mary, have been used in modern art so often. It's not like about used to hurt someone's feelings. It's just about for the artist to express their own beliefs. And Mrs. Podleśna, she made in Photoshop this, she photoshopped this picture of Madonna, of Lady Mary of Częstochowa, because she wanted to show that Mary is the one who is always with people, although she isn't a Catholic anymore. But she just wanted to show that, and she wanted to show her solidarity with LGBTQ community. She has been persecuted for it terribly, and yet cases of destroying of real things that belong to other churches, nothing happens to them. Like I've heard of many destructions of Orthodox crosses. No one does anything. I remember a few years ago, our mosque in my town was also attacked, and people who did that made graffiti with crosses and with Christian fishes, which was like hilarious, because this mosque wasn't again made by immigrants. It was made by a local Muslim community in 1980s. And it's sad that people just don't understand those basic things. 2020 last year was a very harsh year, I think, also due to the pandemic, but also due to the fact that we had presidential elections. In those presidential elections, our president, current re-elect Andrzej Duda, he had this hate campaign against LGBTQ people, in which he said those famous words: LGBT is are not people, it's an ideology. Which, from a Western perspective, is an absurd, because how can you say that a group of people are an ideology? This is again another thing that we have no real sex education, and we don't talk about history from another point of view. Like, we don't talk about history of masses. We only talk about history of individuals. Again, people have no idea here even who are the LGBTQ people, and when they don't know who they are, it's very easy to manipulate their view of it. Recently in 2020 also that had the Constitutional Court, which is a fake Constitutional Court. It's illegal. The judges were changed on a legal basis. They shouldn't be there. They made abortions in case of damaged fetus, which was about 98% of legal abortion in Poland. They made it illegal. From October, we have those large protests going on against the government and the church. Those protests are very anti-clerical. Many people leave the church because they feel like they have no place in there for themselves. I was surprised that like American or Australian Catholics, for instance, used this picture as their symbol of solidarity, which was really beautiful. But in Poland, it's like conservative Catholics see it as a symbol of hate of the leftists against the church. This is really absurd, when you look at the conservative agenda here. They're like creating an alternative reality. I think I can tell my story more or less shortly, although I think it is like with every story, it is hard to focus on show all the aspects of it. First of all, I am not a typical Polish Catholic. I'm definitely not, although I'm a cradle Catholic, because I'm technically from a mixed family, because one of my parents is agnostic due to the fact that this person went through a very complicated deconstruction when I was young. And it kind of made me used to the fact that, people deconstruct, although I didn't know the name at the time. I just knew that, some people change their beliefs. And okay, I cannot impose it on this person. They have their own choice, and I believe that God is enough understanding that he can understand the circumstances that caused this deconstruction. Many people, for instance, in Poland leave church due to its tied to politics, and the fact that most priests can't keep their political views for their own. And that was also the case with this person. My parent just couldn't survive it anymore and just said, okay, I'm done with it. And I understand, because it is tiring. You just feel alone with this mass of people who just agree to it. So I think that I've had in my life a few deconstructions and reconstructions of my faith. When this whole protest thing happened, I was in the midst of another reconstruction, which from my point of view right now, like half a year later, I think it was a little bit to the conservative side, although I already understood that I cannot impose my beliefs on other people. I was like, okay, I will be very tough and conservative towards myself, but I will let people live the way they want to live. But then the protest happened, and it was like a huge, huge movement. They were the biggest protests since 1989. So you can imagine, despite the pandemic, that many people went out and wanted just to show their hate towards the government. One of the slogans of the protests was "Wypierdalać," which means "get the fuck out." This is literally the. So you can imagine the tensions here. At some point, I was almost sure that we would have a revolution in a model that is similar to the Ukrainian model of revolution, like a very bloody movement, generally, that people would just storm the presidential palace. The tensions are maybe not that bad at the moment, but I remember being very, very stressed. And also I remember I was thinking myself what I think about abortion, because in my background, I was used to not really thinking much about abortion, because my mother, she is not very pro-choice, I would say. Not the fact that she's the most conservative person ever, she just, due to the fact that she really wanted to have me for so many years and couldn't, she just can't imagine herself wanting to have an abortion, and that's the reason. I also grew up with the fact that I was being an only child born after 11 years of marriage. I was used to the fact of being this wanted child. I can't imagine. I have a few friends who have been wanted, who have been born and were unwanted by their mothers, and they have felt it. But I kind of now can understand how complicated the situation with abortion is. It is not about pretty babies being born to women who just are too lazy to not to have a child. Many women, I remember, shared their stories online. Many mothers of disabled children shared their stories. I think my friend also, she kind of sent me a story of her, I think, distant relative who had a disabled son, and this boy died recently. Really poor child. He had a terrible life, although his parents tried to do everything to make it as good as possible. But it was known that the boy would never become an adult and a normal adult. This changed the way I view myself as a Catholic. I do feel the connection with the church, with the history, with this, let's say, being Catholic, the idea of being Catholic. But after that time, I don't know whether I feel any more connection with the hierarchy of anything. I didn't feel it much before, but right now it feels even less. There is even this joke among progressive Catholics in Poland, which is a very small group, but when we meet each other, we become best friends. The joke it goes this way. The conference, the bishops' conference is like the orchestra on Titanic. They play until the very end. Like they feel like what they're doing has no consequences. People will still agree for them talking about really stupid bullshit. Like we have this Bishop of Krakow. I'm glad I don't live in Krakow because I probably wouldn't be Catholic anymore if I lived in Krakow. The Bishop of Krakow is Marek Jędraszewski, and there is a theory that the guy has complexes because he isn't a cardinal and he believes that he should be already at this point of his career or something. He got rewarded for spreading anti-LGBTQIA hate by comparing LGBTQ people to Bolshevism. I know it sounds absurd, but we are, because this is our historical background, we are really afraid of the Bolsheviks because we had a war with Bolsheviks. My grandfather, even my ancestors fought in this war, and we are and comparing like LGBTQ people to Bolsheviks, it's like giving them the face of the worst evil that can attack Poland ever. And no, this is absurd. What I told myself at this point, I'm gonna do what I can for as long as I can. Although it is sad, it feels like fighting for a change feels like being a nurse in a hospital. And you're taking care of this patient who has been maltreated for all his life. He didn't care about his health much for a long time. So you try to do your best as a nurse. Let's say you try to help this patient, but then you learn about that the doctor who is supposed to care for this patient gives them poison. Real poison, and you just go to this doctor and you tell him, but how? This patient is dying. You cannot give them drugs. You cannot give them morphine because they get addicted, etc. And the doctor is like, but what are you talking about? Everything is perfectly fine. And it just feels like it, and you're trying just to do your best to help and to save the ill man, but that the way you just leave your watch for a while, they will be given poison later, and it will only lead them to a very painful, prolonged death. Yeah, this is how it feels. I'm trying not to be negative at this point. It actually feels like many people ask me whether I still believe in God in this whole situation. This is quite interesting because I feel deeply connected to God since I was a very young child, and I can't explain it logically because you can't just explain those things like in science. It's like I have like I always like had this feeling, for instance, that when I got to Holy Communion, like I always feel a little bit my heart moving, which is unnatural. You shouldn't feel your heart moving, and it feels a little bit like a pre-heart attack thing. Yet at the same time, it feels okay, like nothing is going on. It's very unbelievable how this happens, like how your body even reacts to it. I'm trying currently with my friends to make some change, and I told myself I will give myself time to learn a lot about activism, because it was also paradoxically the activism in church was like the first time for me that I really got into one topic, and I decided to, on such a scale, to do something about it, to make a change. Although it is very hard in the Polish situation, that due to the fact that we are so backwards in our church, and that we are currently repeating the Irish scenario when no one is doing anything about it. And we are becoming technically also a fascist autocracy, which is really scary, really, really scary. And I don't know whether I will stay Catholic in this church for the future, to be honest. And I told myself, that, okay, you have old Catholics movement for an option when something really fails, when you tell yourself that, no, you just can't do it anymore. I will be like, okay, this is my option. But for the time being, I'm like, okay, I will do something. I will do what I can. You know, I am very hopeful for American progressive Catholics, because I feel like you guys have more chance to do a change. There are more of you, simply. There are more young people among you. In Poland, when they see a young person, like I'm 20, and when people see me or my friends who want to do something about it, they're like, but you're so young. How can you, like, why aren't young people supposed to leave, or aren't young people supposed to just listen to the elders? And I'm like, no, no, I just want to do a change. But yeah, it is, I think, very hard. There is lots of, I think, mental pressure. As I said before to you, but I didn't say that to the audience, there was at some point a huge pressure to change faith in the society. And of course, I think it is not the best way to do it to someone. And I educated my friends on why they shouldn't do it. Because it is nasty. I think that still someone that converts or decides to be agnostic or atheist shouldn't do it on a whim. I believe that, okay, you can change your faith, but you need time to think about it. You need time to learn, so that you have kind of this process that you go through. And I know people who convert. I have friends who convert to Lutheranism, but they do it after a year or two. And they have like a year of preparation for it, or people who convert to Orthodoxy. And but really, I really hated that when random people on the internet who just got to my Facebook post that I wrote after this situation, and this post went viral. And I remember that there was this random girl, for instance, also who wrote to me. There was my ex-teacher also who wrote to me, oh, but why can't you just become Protestant? And I said, you know, there are many differences between Protestant churches and Catholicism generally, regardless of whether we speak of Roman Catholic churches or Old Catholic movement. Like, not to speak that there is no veneration of Mary.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. Something that I like to tell progressive Catholics, or just people that don't feel connected to their particular parish, because I have a lot of viewers that they might live in an area, even in the United States, where the only parish that's available is a very conservative parish. Something that I always try to recommend to people is that they go to Mass on Sunday, they receive Holy Communion, but maybe they find their community with other groups of Catholics, maybe from different parishes, maybe from online, and, you know, maybe like participate in your individual parish activities, like make that be kind of like minimal, like if you don't feel safe, but like always, like, I think that like going and receiving sacraments, I think is like really, really essential, and that's what keeps you like a practicing Catholic and stuff. But like other than that, like, you don't have to necessarily be like totally involved that parish. Like, you can find your community with other groups of Catholics, like, again, on the internet, or like even people could just meet at people's houses and do a rosary group.
Perfectly, that's totally true. I totally agree. I don't feel a connection with any parish in Poland, because I think parishes function a little bit differently than in the West. But our church is very feudal still. So when the bishop says something, oh, everyone has to do it. And, you know, I remember even there was this case on Polish internet. It was very popular because there was this German Franciscan nun, very young girl. I think her name was also Sophia. And she, after all this thing that the Vatican said about LGBTQ people, she showed solidarity with LGBTQ people. And she made a selfie with rainbow flag on her face, painted on her face, and she was, many people just loved it. And I remember that. I think that if a nun and a priest did that in Poland, that they would face really terrible consequences. Like, they would immediately have a ban for a public speech, a ban for this, ban for that. And it's not like we don't have sometimes priests or nuns who say no, but our bishops are not used to hearing no, and they don't want to hear it when they do. They're just old men who are really, their minds are in the past very much, and we need to look into the future. That is why I really respect the church in Germany, for instance, because they think about the future. I really respect the German church for their path with synodality. But of course, this is another historical background. They couldn't focus on the patriotical aspect of being a Catholic in Germany because of Nazism, which was very nationalistic also. So they needed to focus on another aspect of religion, and I think they moved onto a better path. Of course, it's not like it's perfect. They are also figuring out their ways for the future, but at least they're doing. Whereas in here, no one is even thinking that we need to think about the future. It's like, oh, we just need to focus on the past. Past was perfect.
Yeah, and it's like you're like a history student, so you know all about like the past, and you know this idealized version of the past that the traditionalists can kind of idealize, like really never existed. It never existed, and it's like, I guess that's a really good segue, I guess, into like some of the questions I have for you. How much power would you say that traditionalist Catholicism has in Poland?
I think it does a lot, much power, let's say. Many people think this is the only version of Catholicism available. People have a very clericalized view of Catholicism in here. Although whether it does have power over the younger generation of the society, I wouldn't agree. I wouldn't agree, since many people are now cutting their ties with the church, and they change their churches, or they become agnostics or atheists. So I wouldn't say that they have power in the younger generation, but in general, with the state, with how much agenda there is around it, I would say, yeah, they have a lot of power. And it's unbelievable that when you even listen to those people, what they are saying, there are people who really make money on spreading shit. Like really, really stupid things. Like there are journalists who are conservative formally and are like and declare themselves Catholic, but there's so much hate speech that it's unbelievable. And I understand that you become angry at something, like at some point, and you just write something really angry from time to time on the internet. But there is this journalist, Rafał Ziemkiewicz, and there is a joke about Rafał Ziemkiewicz that he can't stand 15 minutes without writing a hate post on Facebook. and when he goes to confession before the Holy Communion, and he just does that during the Mass, he gets the Holy Communion, then he leaves the church, goes home and does it again, and the circle repeats every week. It's the whole joke about the guy. Unfortunately, the agenda is huge, but let's hope they will lose power, because I can't stand them, to be honest. My friends think that because I'm Catholic, I'm supposed to tolerate them. I tolerate them even less than they do.
I have that same struggle. It's like I have like friends that are like, or there's people on the, actually like my secular friends are very supportive of everything I do, but like people on the internet will make a post like, you are awful, how could you be like okay with this institution? And then it's like I feel like I'm like that nurse that you said, that it's like we're trying to like help like the patient that's like, bleeding out, and then the doctor's like incompetent, and like we're just trying to do our job as the nurse.
Yeah, we are the nurse, exactly.
The rest of Catholics and like just like well-meaning Catholics are just like the nurse, and then it's like I feel like that like clericalism's like that doctor that's just like, whatever, I'm the doctor, so like
I know everything the best, yeah, but dude, did you even look at the medical documentation of the patient? I don't need it.
I don't need it. I have seen,
I know everything the best. Yeah.
It's interesting, I guess, in the United States, because we've also kind of had like our politics had been pushed to the right, like from like 2016 to 2020, and like they still are.
I know. Trump.
Right.
Trump happened.
Yeah, because of like Trumpism, and evangelical Christianity kind of played more of a role in Trumpism than Catholicism did, but there definitely was kind of like an alliance between traditionalist Catholicism and the conservative evangelical church, and which was really bizarre because evangelicals hate Catholics. A big reason why I wanted to make my channel was because I was raised with more progressive Catholicism, and I wasn't seeing that being really represented online. And like what I was seeing online was a lot of like young traditionalists that were really, really just like, again, like idealizing this vision of the past that never existed, and presenting it as this is the only way you be Catholic. And we just know that that is not true. We know that Catholicism manifests itself in a variety of ways. That's not to say that the traditionalists are not Catholic. I will never call anybody who is a baptized Catholic a non-Catholic. I would never say that. But just we have to just be more honest about like that there's other people. It's a mixed bag of people, you know, that have different views on things and are still very devout. Like I know that there's a lot of progressive Catholics that they pray their rosary and they go to mass every week and stuff. Like they're very devout people, and they still are socialist, or they're liberal, or they're progressive, you know?
Yeah, like people think that those things exclude each other. Whereas when you look even at history, and again, this is also the case with history of Poland, that some leftists in Polish history were really devout Catholics, or generally Christian, or Muslim, for instance, or Jewish, or whatever. And, you know, I also really get on my nerves, but this is another branch of the discussion when conservatives think that socialism equals communism. No, so communism is like a very radicalized branch of socialism, let's say. And I really hate it because I have a paternal, let's say, like an uncle, grandfather. I don't know how to put that in English, but he was like an uncle of my grandfather, I think, who was a socialist before the war. And in 1945, he basically disappeared, meaning disappeared that, you know, politicians and other people who didn't want to stick with the Communist Party were expelled from the society. So sometimes they were like kept as prisoners, sometimes they were killed or sent to Moscow for processes, for legal processes which were legal only on paper, etc. And I know that this uncle disappeared this way. We often say that Black Volga was this characteristical Soviet car, that the Black Volga took him, meaning that KGB, or already that was the Polish version of KGB. What was its name? I remember the Polish shorted version, but I can't somehow remember the English version. They took him, which means that he's gone somewhere. Probably there is no grave, nothing. So yeah, that's the reality in Soviet countries, let's say, which was also very often communist only on paper. Just like China today says it's communist, but it's one of the most capitalistic societies in the whole world. Like,
yeah, literally.
They need an ideology, but I'm on at uni and does a lot of stuff related to East Asia. And I remember we had this seminar with a guy who spoke on China and the ideology that Xi Jinping is promoting. And in my opinion, he is like a little bit fascist, but with communist glasses. Like he says that he is pro Mao, he is pro Lenin, pro Marx, but his greatest inspiration is Lenin. He's a Leninist, not a Maoist. so yeah, and a fascist in my opinion, because he's also quite nationalistic. Suddenly they started promoting more traditional values, the Confucian values in China. So like women back to giving birth and so on. So yeah, traditionalists, they often believe that they can decide or determine whether someone is Catholic or not. I hate people who like diagnose you through the internet and they just say, oh, I see that you fell astray from your path. Are you my confession, or did I just confess to you and give you the right to give some judgment on my belief? no, don't do it. Leave, really, because this is terrible when you let those people get on you, and they just don't stop, and that is terrible, really.
Like the traditionalists online, like, or we call them rad trads.
Yeah, rather threats.
Rad trads. They are just some of the meanest comments I've ever gotten were from rad trads, and
Yes.
I had never, when I first started my channel, like, I never thought that, like, I don't know, I thought that I would be getting more, like, angry comments from atheists, but no, it was from rad trads. And I was like, oh my word, like, and even, like, from some of them who are, like SXPX, like, Catholics that aren't even in communion with Rome, like, and they're, like, yelling at you about, like, that you're not Catholic. I'm like, you're not even in communion with Rome anymore. How have the protests strengthened and also challenged your identity as a Catholic?
I think I already said a little bit on that, but I think they challenged the way I viewed during my another deconstruction. They kind of changed the path a little bit. It made me like identify as Catholic, but I don't really view right now Catholicism as only following all the laws. Just only focusing on the, you can do this, you can do that, you should do this and that. Only on the rules, and generally focus on moral theology. I don't focus on that anymore. I decided that I would like to learn more about other branches of theology and generally about theology, which is really hard because many new theological movements I think in the church that are going on right now are really unknown in Poland. We have this still very old outlook on theology. Like there is, for instance, this one Polish feminist theologian, Zuzanna Radzik, who wrote this book, The Church of Women, and the feminists, the women who built the church. And she wrote about when she studied theology in Warsaw, I think, or in Krakow, when she said that all her professors just thought that theology is just made through in prayer room. You just don't go out to the people, you don't talk to the believers. And she said, she once wrote, I think, that meeting with her Western counterparts completely changed her outlook on this. Yeah, I think it challenged also my identity as a Roman Catholic in particular. I think that I used to I thought once about becoming a Greek Catholic when I was really into Eastern Slavic Christianity. But now I think I would, if I were to change, I would probably lean more onto old Catholic movement somehow. Again, when I leave the church, it will be as if the nurse just said, okay, I'm done with helping the patient. It is sad because the patient will die, but
I think that's what's so hard, I think, is because it's like we need people to like stay like and like do the fight as like progressive Roman Catholics, but at the same time it's like people can only take so much, and they can only take so much heartbreak and frustration and stuff, and sometimes like the healthiest thing for you to do at that time is to just like take a break and go I feel like that people need to always just like remember what about Catholicism made them fall in love with it. And that's been something I've been having to do. That's why I always like say that like mysticism's the antidote to clericalism. We need an empowered laity to reclaim the church because it's our church, and we need to just kind of get back to the grassroots of like practicing our own faith in even in our homes, like even if it, that in itself is a really radical action. Like prayer, the rosary can be a really radical action, and I think that it can empower people to feel like, yes, I am Catholic, and yes, I am just as Catholic as the Pope, I'm just as Catholic as these bishops, and I think that's really, really positive for a lot of people. But I understand that it can be so toxic sometimes that you just have to take a break from it all.
Yeah, I think it collects all your thoughts, I think. But I do understand why many people leave, and the saddest point of it is whole situation with the protests is that also many great people left the church before, a year before, recently. There was this one blogger, for instance, who was very well known, although I didn't align with her at all times, Jola Szymańska, who left the church, but also she was a victim of occasional, let's say, but it sounds terrible, sexual abuse from a priest she trusted when she was a young girl. She was raised in a very traditionalist background, and it caused her much trauma. So I understand why she left, because she had to rethink her identity, perhaps. She had some kind of identity crisis. But she did. She also had started this movement called "Let's Reclaim Our Church," and it was like a form of a silent protest in Kurias. But of course, they never listened to him. You know, sometimes I'm just thinking when I was thinking recently about leaving, I just told myself, okay, just give it a fight. But when you scream loudly. And make them sure that they know they have been warned. What happens when they don't change? And when they don't choose not to change, okay, that's their choice. They want to live on Titanic, fine. No, I hope this won't happen. When you look even at most bishops' conference, they are made of people who are much older than I am, and they will die before me. And sometimes I think, yeah, you will die one day. And what next? What next? What will happen next when you pass away? But of course, they don't make a point to think about it. But I feel Catholic as a part of it. I practice Catholic, but sometimes it makes you wonder whether you're still aligned with the institution enough. And this is sad, I think. You know, they use this power so much, so much. And this is the problem of the Polish church mainly, because I have met people from other, like Catholics from other countries who act so differently, and they show you that you can act so differently and still be Catholic. That you guys really give me hope. Like, in case you wanted to check out this guy, there is this Czech priest, Tomasz Halik. I'm writing it right now without Czech characters, but when you write his name on Google, he will definitely pop out. And he's a really wise guy, in my opinion, and really, I would say he's laid back, kind of. I remember when we had this case when the Bishop of Krakow just called LGBTQ people Bolshevism. And he just wrote a whole letter to him regarding that he wishes him a very nice session of confessions with LGBTQ people who have been, made leave their home by their parents and became homeless because of their conservative parents, for instance. I would also say that many conservative Catholics in Poland take lots of inspiration from American evangelicals, which is quite interesting, because later they will tell you that that they are not that they are better than Protestants. They support the tradition, and they are better generally. We are not like those liberal Protestants. Again, they impose their own beliefs about progressive Christianity on all of Protestants, which is not true, as we know. Conservative agenda, again, even in regarding teaching the youth in the church, is huge. I hope I am giving us some kind of a cautionary tale for Western Catholics. Like, don't go this path. Don't join with the government. Don't just stop wanting power. You don't need power as Catholics, as a Catholic church. You can do so much better, change for the better in the society.
Thank you so much for talking with me. I really, really appreciate your perspective, and I think that it's a much, much needed perspective, because we are progressive Catholics, we exist,
yep.
And we aren't going away, and we're not going to shut up.
I'm gonna scream as much as I can, as I said. I'm gonna scream that they will hear about it at one day.
Yeah, even if it's one day when we're very old women, maybe, Yeah, thank you so much, guys, for watching. Please consider supporting me on my Patreon account. That really, really helps financially support the work that I do here. And again, go check out Sophia's Instagram. Her Instagram is amazing. And just thank you so much, guys, for watching. I'm Cassidy. I'm the Hippie Catholic. God bless.